Erev Tov Rabotai, we're continuing with our Mishna Yomi in Masechet Peah. We're up to Perek Zayin Mishnah Chet. Now we said previously in the Mishnah, property that is hekdesh, that is consecrated to the treasury of the Beit HaMikdash, is not obligated in the gifts to the poor, like the Shicha and Peah, etc. The Mishnah now is going to discuss a halacha where somebody consecrated, he gave over his vineyard to the temple treasury, the Beit HaMikdash treasury, while the grapes were still growing. Hamakdish kamo, if someone consecrated his vineyard to the temple treasury, ad shelo notu bo alelot, before the alelot can be identified, meaning the grapes were too small to discern what cluster is underdeveloped and what cluster is regularly developed, and that's when he donated it to the Beit HaMikdash. And the alelot la'aniyim, the olelet do not belong to the poor, because by the time the olelot, the clusters, you realize that these are underdeveloped and these are developed, it was all in the property of the Beit HaMikdash treasury, and the Beit HaMikdash treasury is exempt from gifts for the poor. However, if a person consecrates his vineyard after the olelot are already identifiable, you can already tell which clusters are underdeveloped. The olelot belong to the poor, even though the poor cannot take it now, because you have to wait, like we learned previously, until the time of harvest. But once the Beit HaMikdash harvests it, the olelot belong to the poor, because the Mifarshim explain that as soon as it becomes clear that a cluster is underdeveloped, it automatically belongs to the poor people. Therefore, this owner, even though the poor people cannot come take it, because he didn't begin harvesting it, he cannot give over these olelot to the property of the Beit HaMikdash, since it's not his. Therefore, when the Beit HaMikdash decide to harvest it, it must be given over to the poor. Rabbi Yossi says, in this case where it was consecrated after the olelot, the underdeveloped clusters were already identifiable, they must give hekdesh the value of the growth, meaning the value of the difference between the value now and when it was given over to hekdesh. Why? Because Rabbi Yossi holds that even though the olelet belonged to the poor, they were drawing nourishment from the vines and soil that belong to hekdesh, therefore they have to give that difference. Now the Mishnah is going to tell us, just like you have peret and olelet by grapes, you have also shicha by grapes, meaning grapes that you forgot in the vineyard have to be left over for the poor. Now how do you have shicha by a trellised vine? You have wooden frames and you have a wild vine that grows throughout that wooden frame. Which point does it become shicha? Whenever the harvester forgets a grape and he moves far enough that he can no longer stretch out his hand and take it, he's plucking cluster, and then he realizes, oh, I left one back there. If you cannot stretch far enough his hand to get it, it's considered shicha, and he can no longer take it, he must leave it for the poor. That's what it means, lo tashuv lekachto, you cannot turn back to get it. However, as long as he can still reach the forgotten grape, it's not considered shicha, because since the vines are all intertwined, he's not considered to have finished with the vine until he moves so far that he cannot reach it anymore. And we learned previously that shicha only applies once the farmer is done harvesting and he moves on. If he's not done harvesting, he can come back and collect the forgotten fruit without turning back. And therefore it's not shicha. So since here it's in the case where he can stretch out his hand, it's not considered forgotten. But if he can't, it's considered forgotten by the trellis vine. Rogliot are like lashon regel. They're vines that are spread out on the ground. They grow on the ground. Now in this case, if you forgot the grapes on the ground, it's considered shicha as soon as the farmer passes it. Why? Because even though he's still close enough to stretch out his hand and get it, each vine is distinct and separate. So once he moves past it, we say that he's finished with it, and if he forgot, it's considered shicha. That is the end of Perek Zayin. We're beginning Perek Chet now, Mishnah Aleph. Now we know that these gifts that belong to the poor, the leket, shicha, and peah, once the poor people finish searching the field or the orchard for their gifts, any gifts that are later found in this field are considered onerous and can be taken by anybody, even wealthy person. And the Rab explains why. Once all the poor people, and we're going to see different groups of poor people, once they have gone through the field or the vineyard, we assume that they gave up hope on finding any more gifts because they already searched themselves. So if any gifts end up being found in this field, they're considered onerous because the poor people gave up hope on them and can be acquired by anyone, both rich and poor alike. Now Mishnah says, when is it considered that the poor people gave up hope? When is everybody, even wealthy, allowed to collect the leket, shicha, peah that was left over in the field? So the Mishnah says, after the elderly poor people have gone throughout the field. Now the Rav explains the zkenim alchim al mishantam, they walk very slowly. Since they're the last group to search a field, because they walk slowly and they come the latest, Once they left, we say that the poor people are not coming back. They gave up hope on whatever's left because they couldn't find it. So whatever somebody else finds belongs to him, whether wealthy or whether poor. Beperet ve'olelot. When do peret and olelot, the gifts that belong to the poor by the vineyard, by the grapes, become available for anybody else to take? After the poor people have gone through the vineyard once to search it, and then they repeat it again. They came back a second time. After they're done with that second time, it becomes free for anybody to take. We don't wait for the old people, like in the previous case, because the Mifashim explained, since grapes they're so fond by people, they're especially fond by people, the elderly people make sure to come early as well. So once the Ani make the second round, we say everyone has already done their tour, and they give up hope on whatever's remaining. Ubezitim, when do Shicha and Peah apply to olives? The Mifashim explain that it's specifically Shicha and Peah, and it's not any of the other gifts. When do Shicha and Peah of olives become free for anybody to take? After the second rainfall. Again, Rabotai, we don't wait for the poor people, because the Mifashim explain, since olives are usually harvested late in the season, in the year, it's too cold for old people to go out, we're not concerned for them. We wait till the end of the second rainfall, and the Rav explains, during an average year, the second rainfall in Eretz Yisrael usually comes by the 23rd of the month of Cheshvan. By that time, the poor people assume already that all the Shicha and Peah was taken from all the olive groves, and therefore they give up hope on whatever's remaining, and therefore after this time, anybody can come and take any remaining olives. Now, Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with this last case. Amar Rabbi Yehuda says, but there are some people that don't even begin to harvest their olives until after the second rainfall. How can the Tana Kama make a general statement? After the second rainfall, anyone can take the remaining olives. But Rabbi Yehuda says some people didn't even begin to harvest yet until after the second rainfall. Rather, Shicha and Peah become permissible for everyone to take, whether rich or poor, when the amount of the remaining gifts is so small that if the poor person would go out to the olive grove to collect them, he would be unable to bring back 4 isars worth. Now, Rabotai, an isar is a small coin. 4 isars is enough to buy 4 meals, which is a day's worth of food for a man and his wife, 2 meals for each of them. Because you have 2 meals, breakfast and dinner, let's say, for both of them, that's 4 meals. Now, the poor consider, the Rav explains, anything less than these 4 meals for them and their wife throughout the day is too small already to go back to warrant returning and checking. Therefore, they give up on the right to collect it, and it becomes onerous. So Rabbi Yehuda says the second rainfall is not a factor, because some people don't even begin harvesting until after the second rainfall. Rather, we look at the amount. If it's less than 4 isar of produce, when the poor people are going to come back and take it, it's less than 4 isar, then we say that they don't want to come back for that because it's not enough for them. They need at least 4 meals. Therefore, they give up hope on it, and it becomes free for anybody to take. Then Rabbi Yehuda, and the Rav says the halacha does not follow Rabbi Yehuda. The halacha follows the Tana Kama. After the second rainfall, the olives are free for anyone to take. And Rabotai, just to point out from Mishnah Chet in the previous Perek, we had a machloket between Tana Kama and Rabbi Yossi about the vineyard that was sanctified to Bet Mikdash when the underdeveloped clusters were already noticeable. Tana Kama said poor people get it just like that. Rabbi Yossi said they receive it, but they have to give the difference between when it was donated and now, the value difference, because it was nourishing from the soil and vineyard that belonged to the Hekdesh. The Rav explained that was Rabbi Yossi, that they have to give the difference between when it was donated and now, because it was benefiting from the Hekdesh soil and vine. That is the end of today's Mishna Yomi, Rabotai. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.